With the help of Hashem, we are starting Masechtas Yoma. We are dedicating today's class, L'Refuah Shalema, to our Chaver from our group, Baruch Ben Shifra. May he indeed have a speedy and full recovery. Amen. Masechtas Yoma, as we spoke out when we began Shkalim, the way we are mesadered in the Seder of learning through Shas, is that the first three Masechtas, Brachas, Shabbos, Eruvin, are Masechtas that are not Beis HaMikdash related. Right? Brachas, Shabbos, and Eruvin are dinim that are Bein Bizman HaBayis, Bein Shaloi Bizman HaBayis. Psachim, Shkalim, and not Rosh Hashanah, but Dafke Yoma are three Masechtas, one after the other, that are all about the Avodah of the Beis HaMikdash. And indeed, perhaps the reason why the Yoma comes after Shkalim and not Psachim, not Rosh Hashanah, even though really Rosh Hashanah should come before Yom Kippur, and because we want to make a chazaka dealing with temple topics, dealing with the Beis HaMikdash. Furthermore, as the Sefer Yetzirah writes, that reality should be divided into the three categories of Ashan, Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. L'choira Pesach deals about an inyan nafshi, because Pesachim is all about our freedom, the soul's freedom from Mitzrayim, and ultimately the cherus that the neshama has is dafka by leaving Mitzrayim to get the Torah. Shkalim, as we spoke out yesterday by the Siyum, is about elevating the physical world, because if you want to take one thing that represents Olam Hazeh, that's the few Shkalim, like money. And then when it comes to Shana, to time, so from all time, Yoma, which is Yom HaKippurim, is the holiest day of the whole year. So we're elevating Sai, Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. Also, just to read as an introduction, the opening words of the Marsha, Chedushei Agadois, says the Marsha that Masechta Zu Nikras Yoma, Al Shem Sheyoim Kippurim Hu Yoim Echad Kadosh Bashana. It's not called Masechtas Yom Kippur. It's called the day. By the way, in Aramish, in Aramaic, it's called Yoma. There's a reason for that. We don't say it in Lashon HaKodesh Yom HaKippurim. One of the reasons I heard is because since Yom Kippur, Taka gives us a kapara, and the only day of the year that the Satan has no koyach, or his koyach is tremendously limited, is on Yom Kippur. And Malachim, including the Satan, is a Chamalach. They don't understand Lashon Arami. So we dafka, since the Neshalma Parim Sefoseinu, learning this Masechta is like fasting on Yom Kippur. We don't want the Malachim to be involved in it. We use a Lashon Arami, which is Yuma. And the Marsha goes on, Umaschelas B'Lashon Shivas Yamim. That's the opening line, Shivas Yamim. Why says the Marsha? Al Shem HaKedusha. Because since Yuma is referring to Yom Kippur, 7 is the number of holiness. Ki hazayin kadosh b'kol makom. Shabbos is the holiest day, and the Shabbos, and there are seven biblical Yomim Tovim, 6 of which there are certain leniencies when it comes to Oichel Nefesh, and the holiest of the holiest day of the year is Yom Kippur, which is why we begin with the number 7, which is the number of Kedusha. Now, the Besechta, as we mentioned, is mainly about the Beis HaMikdash, even though, of course, Yom Kippur is Bein Bizman HaBayis, Bein Shaloi Bizman HaBayis. But the Yom Kippur that we are familiar with during Galus is the Yom Kippur that we'll learn within the 8th chapter, which is the 5 Inuyim, etc. But the Avodah of the Beis HaMikdash, which is all based on psukim that we have in Parshas Acharei Mois. The first 7 of the 8 chapters will be dealing with the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol and the Beis HaMikdash. And actually, we're going to start with that which already takes place prior to Yom Kippur as a hachana for the Avodah of Yom Kippur. As we'll begin learning the first halach in the Mishnah, the first halach in the Masechta, that 7 days prior to Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol is sequestered. He's taken away from his family. He has to live in a unique, special chamber in the Beis HaMikdash to further guarantee that he will not be tamei during the Avodah of Yom Kippur. And as we'll see, Yom Kippur is unique for many reasons, including which the Avodah of Yom Kippur in the Beis HaMikdash can only be done dafke by the Kohen Gadol, not like the avodah every other day of the year, that it could be done by the Kohen Gadol, but it could be done by every other Kohen. So you have to have him doing the avodah. If he'll be kamtame, he won't be able to do the avodah. So to further protect and to secure his status of tahara, he was sequestered. That means he was taken away. He became a parush for 7 days to keep him away from sources of tumah. More details we'll learn. That will be the opening of the Masechta. Now the Mishnah will introduce another, here, a machlokas tanoim, whether there is another step that we take, and that is whether we have to separate for the Kohen Gadol, if the right word is a reserve wife or a backup wife. And as we will see, that the Kohen Gadol must be married while he does the avodah. V'chiper ba'adoi u'ba'ad beisoi. And by the way, there is actually a halacha, a lechatchila dika halacha, an adiel halacha, that a bal tefilla over Yomam Noiraim should be married. Because the Kohen Gadol, when he does the avodah, ideal, it's not a ma'akev, but it's a lechatchila. The Kohen Gadol has to be married. So the question is, do you have to have that, God forbid, if the Kohen Gadol's wife will pass away during Yom Kippur, do we need to have a reserve wife or not? That will be a machloikas tanoim. The Gemara is going to bring a Mishnah from Masechta Para, from Mishnayis and Para, that speaks about a similar concept of preparing 7 days prior, sequestering the Kohen, making sure he doesn't become Tamei. And that is the din that the Kohen that was going to be the one shechting and preparing the Para Aduma doesn't have to be the Kohen Gadol. That can be any Kohen. Even though the first Para Aduma was the Torah speaks about was made by Elazar. But anyways, the Kohen that's going to prepare the Para Aduma also has to be sequestered 7 days prior to him shechting and thus preparing the ashes, the new ashes of the Para Aduma, also to make sure that he won't have any contact with Tuma, with more details that we will learn. So there's a similarity, and we're going to begin, the Gemara is going to begin to ask for the source of both of these halachas. Where do we find such a thing? And it's amazing that if the Chumash speaks about that Vayhi B'Yom Hashmini, with the first day that the avodah was done by the Kahanim in the Beis Hamikdash, Parsha Shmini. Prior to Vayhi B'Yom Hashmini, there was what we call the Shivas Yemei Hamaluyim. During those Shivas Yemei Hamaluyim, which is the 7 days of preparation, inauguration, the Kohanim will also separate it from all else. As it says in the Chumash, for them not to become Tamei. So that is like the father or the mother-in-law. That's the source law. And there's a pasuk at the end of Parshas Tzav that says that just like it was done to the Kohen or to the Kahanim during the Shivas Yemei HaMaluyim, the same should be done, and the Gemara will be medayik from the words in that pasuk, that pasuk is hinting to both 7 days prior to preparing the Para Aduma and the halach in our Masechta 7 days prior to Yom Kippur. We're going to, through this sugya, learn certain limitations of a Gezerah Shava, and we're going to go through various Yomim Tovim, because maybe the 7 days of sequestration is not before Yom Kippur, maybe it's before other Yomim Tovim. We're going to eventually speak about Shmini Atzeres. We're going to, if we'll have time today, we're going to speak about how Shmini Atzeres is considered the Chag Bifnei Atzmai regarding Pzar Kishav. That's the Rashi Tevis that will speak out, and much more. Chavra, let us start. Yoma, Daf Beis, all the way on top of the Amid, beginning with the Mishnah. I also heard that the 8 chapters of Yoma corresponds to the 8 big day Kohen Gadol. And let us start. Says the Mishnah, Shivas Yomim Koidim Yom Kippurim. 7 days already prior to Yom Kippur. Mafrishin Kohen Gadol. We separate the Kohen Gadol. We sequester the Kohen Gadol from his life, from his house. In other words, no one will have contact with him. What's that called today? A person has to go into quarantine. We quarantine the Kohen Gadol. Where does he quarantine? Lelishkas Parhedrin, as we'll see later, exactly more details about this chamber called the Panhedrin's chamber. And let's start Rashi. Says Rashi, Shivas Yomam Kohen Fish Kohen Gadol. Why? Says Rashi, Shekol Avodas Yom Kippurim Eino Kishera Ela Boy. Unlike during the year, Kahanim do the avodah on Yom Kippur, that has to be done dafke with a kohen gadol, as we learn in the final chapter of Masechtas Hodiyos, and daf Yud Beis Amud Beis, etc. Now hold on, just to add a very important nuance to this Rashi. Really, we will have later a machlokes tanoim regarding when we say that the avodah of Yom Kippur can only be done by a kohen gadol. No one debates that. Question is, what about the avodah that's done every day, that's also done on Yom Kippur, the Talmud? The Talmud in the morning is not a unique avodah of Yom Kippur. Does that also only have to be done by a kohen gadol, or only the unique avodah of Yom Kippur has to be done by the kohen gadol? It's mashma from this Rashi that he's siding with those Rishonim that hold shekol avodas Yom Kippurim ein kshay. All avodah has to be done. That's what Rashi is adding l'chayra over here. Okay, and let's go back inside. Before we listen to the first Tosfos, okay? So Tosfos points out, Shivas Yomim Kodim Yom Kippurim. I heard from my teacher that who organized the Tosfosin? B'chlal, there were many Bali Tosfos. That's why there's never a stira between one Tosfos and the other, because it was a compilation of many of the Bali Tosfos. But the one that was in charge of putting together the Tosfosin in Yoma was the Maharam of Rothenburg. Just to be aware of that, and let's go inside. Shivas Yomim Kodim Yom Kippurim says Tosfos Yesh Mekayme Sheshayna Haming in Bereisha. He just points out that there is not a consistency for a reason, but there is not a consistency between. Do we say the formulation of Rabbeinu HaKadosh could have been that Yom Kippur, first mentioning Yom Kippur and then mentioning 7 days, or first mentioning the number and then mentioning Yom Kippur? So he says over here, Sheshoina Haminyan Bereisha, that's the observation he makes. And like we have in Bava Kama, first the number, right, Arba Avos, then the Zikin. Or in the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, Dalid, Rosh Hashanim. And Ve'ike Duchtei, there are other places, the Tanim and Yana L'Basoif, that the number is written at the end. For example, the beginning of Masechtas Avodah Zarah, where it says, Lifnei Eideim Shalev Dekachavim, before the Chagelach of the Goyim, 3 days. And then he brings some Kedushin, right? Ha'isha Niknes, Begimel Derachim, etc. So he's not making a question, he's just pointing out, coming back over here, that here the number comes before the day. And let's go back in the Mishnah. So that's number one. Number two, another preliminary preparation for Yom Kippur, according to the Tanach, says the Mishnah, Maskinen loy koyin acher tachtov. This is l'kula alma, that we also designate, we prepare another koyin, because even though we're taking all of these steps to do what we could humanly possible for the koyin gadol not to become tamei, but he still might become tamei. And what do you do if he becomes tamei? Shema ye'er loy psul. Since he might become tamei, what Tuma says Rashi, umaskinim loy umazminim, we designate a koyin acher, another koyin, who we will call that koyin, right, the koyin gadol in reserve. Liyos koyin gadol tachtav im yero loy psul. What psul says Rashi, keri, he might have a seminal emission. Oy shar Tuma hama'ak v'milovei lemigdash. The psul might only be temporary. So what? But he has to be. We need a koyin gadol on Yom Kippur. Now, Chaver, we are more familiar with Pirkei Avos Perikei, that from the Asara Nisim, that the Mishnah counts, and it's going to be amazing that in the last daf of this Perek, we're going to learn many other miracles aside of the Asara Nisim. But let's go to Pirkei Avos. One of the Asara Nisim is Vishtei that v'lo ira keri, right? Liyoim lekoyin gadol b'yom kippurim. That he never had a keri. So why are we concerned that he might have a re'iyah? Why are we concerned that he might have a seminal emission? So first of all, to know that Asara Nisim happened always Bizman Bayis Rishon. Bizman Bayis Sheni, not always did these miracles happen. Number one. Number two, what did we just learn in Shkolim? Ein Maskirin Masen Nisim. Because Ein Soimchen Alanes. So what? That God made a miracle. That's beautiful. But we have to do our part, taking our precautions. He might have a seminal emission. So they designated a backup kohen gadol back in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, not only did they designate a backup kohen gadol, but af isha acheres maskinuloi, they prepared a backup wife. Why? Because if, God forbid, Shema Thomas Ishtay, if his wife passes away Yom Kippur, And that will not allow him to do the avodah. Why? Because it says in Parshas Achrei v'chiper ba'adai that this is a pasuk regarding Yom Kippur, that his avodah will bring atonement for him. Uba'ad beisai, and for his beisai. What is the beisai? One's house is one's wife. Zu ishtoi. So since she might pass away, now you have to appreciate that someone becoming tamei is something a lot more prevalent than someone's wife passing away. But it still might happen. However, Amrullah, the Chachamim challenged Rabbi Yehuda, and they say, yeah, a backup Kohen Gadol everyone holds you have to have. But a backup wife, imkain meaning if there is a possibility, if we have to be worried about the possibility of a sudden death, Rabbi Yehuda is not saying, God forbid if his wife is very sick. He's saying every year you have to have it. Every year she's healthy. She might right away pass away. So he says, Ein lo davar soif. Ein lo davar soif means, why is one backup wife enough? You have to have two backup wives. You have to have three backup wives. In other words, when a person is healthy, halachically, you don't have to be concerned that that person will right away pass away. Masha inkin, if a person is tahar, you have to be worried that the person will become tummy. Becoming tummy is something that doesn't take that much effort. Happens without effort.
One of the davar soif also for tumah. You need another one and another one.
No. So let's go to step number one, step number two. That for a Kohen Gadol, for a person to become tamei is something that's very shaykh to happen. Now, you're right. So why not get number two? For that I'll say Ein lo davar soif. At least have one backup. What they're telling Rabbi Yehuda is that the Kohen Gadol's wife is healthy. So you're saying she might suddenly die. So if that's the worry, so then Ein lo davar soif. So therefore do nothing. It makes so much sense. A person has to be concerned that he will become tamei. A person should not walk around concerned that his spouse will pass away. People don't walk around with that concern under normal circumstances. Okay. And by the way, the whole concept of whether we're mechash lemisa, Tosfos, the second Tosfos points out there is a big difference, like we mentioned. Mechash lemisa, sudden death, is something that we don't accept. But there are other areas in halacha that when you look at something long term, sometimes you say the opposite. In the long term, we're chayish that someone might pass away. But that's not the case over here. Here we're speaking about, in every case, says Rabbi Yehuda, the Kohen Gadol has to have a backup wife. Why? If if the circumstances is that the person's wife is healthy, then you don't have to make any backup wife. Says the Gemara, quoting a Mishnah in Parah, same concept of the Shivas Yomim, mafrishin, right? We sequester, we force him to quarantine. We have regarding the law of the Kohen who's going to be preparing the Para Aduma. Says the Mishnah, Shivas Yomim Koidem Sreifas Apara. 7 days before the Para Aduma is burnt. This is not something that's very common. As we know, as the Rambam writes, that Moshe Rabbeinu, it was the first Para was burnt in the Midbar, Parshas Chukas. Then says the Rambam that when was the second Para Aduma burnt? It's amazing. Ezra burnt the second Para Aduma. Can you imagine? That means from Moshe until Ezra, the Ephraim of Moshe was enough. After Ezra, who was involved in the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, during the Zman Bayesheni itself, after Ezra, there was another 7 Para Adumas. So either there was a tremendous amount of Tumah, or there was something miraculous with the ashes of Moshe. It eventually ran out. What did we learn in Shkalim? About the Sheman HaMishcha, B'chlal never ran out. And as the Rambam writes, so up until now we had 9 Para Adumas, and the 10th Para Aduma will be made under the leadership of Mashiach, as the Rambam writes, Meheira Yegala Amen Ken Yiratzen. And as the Rebbe used to point out, the Rebbe points out that why would the Rambam write Meheira Yegala Amen Ken Yiratzen as a Tefilla? The Rambam is writing a sefer of halachas. So the Rambam is telling us a halacha that whenever a Yid speaks about Mashiach, he has to want for Mashiach's revelation to be so quick that he cannot do anything other than saying Meheira Yegala. That's a halacha from the Rambam. Weiter. So says the Mishnah, Shivas Yomim Kodim Sevas HaPara, Hoy Mafrishin Koyen, Asoy HaPara, Mebeisoi, they would separate, they would sequester the Koyen that was going to be the one preparing the Para. he shechts it and he burns it, etc. And where would he be quarantined in? Lelishka sha'al pnei habira, to the chamber that's in front of the bira. We'll see soon more about the word bira with more details. Where was this chamber? It was tzafayna mizracha. It was northeast of the Azara. And furthermore, Velishkas Beiso Evan Hoysen Kreis, and it was called the chamber of the stone house. And now the Gemara interrupts. Why was it called the chamber of the stone house? Because all of the procedures that were done in that chamber, all of the kalim, all of the utensils in there were made out of utensils that halachically cannot become tamei, which would be clay galalim. I don't know who would use a clay galalim. That means if you make a utensil from dung, from manure, it's not mekabel tamei. Even if a source touches it or has halachic contact with it, or clay avanim, which indeed it was called beis ha'evan, stone utensils, and clay adama. In other words, when you put adama, when you put earth in a kiln, then it's called a clay cheres. Then it's not only mekabel tamei, from the inside, but you can't even be matayed it. But if you didn't yet fire up the clay adama, so it's like a very delicate, but it's not mekabel tuma. And my tama, why indeed did they only use kalim in this chamber that are not susceptible to tuma? Because the kivan that full yoim kasher bepara. One of the arguments that the tzedukam had with our chachamim, they denied the oral Torah, was regarding the following: when if a kohen would become tamei, and he already went to the mikvah, if all that is needed is head of shemesh, and as we learned in the beginning of brachos, that for chulin you don't need head of shemesh, but for truma you have a vestige of truma on you, and you can only eat truma after it gets dark, and certainly so by kachim. So the tzedukam felt that tzedukam made up that if a person became tamei and it's the last day of their truma and they already went to the mikvah, if they did not yet have head of shemesh, they cannot be involved in preparing the paraduma. The emesis, Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah Shabbat Peh says, that even if a person doesn't yet have head of shemesh, it does not disqualify him of being involved in the paraduma. Now, no one is saying that you have to become tamei, but since this was a point of contention, so we dafke made the kohen who's going to shech the paraduma tamei. Now, we didn't make him tamei b'tumas meis. Why would we do that? We made him tamei through a sheretz, which means he only became a rishon. He right away went to the mikvah, and he dafke would prepare the paraduma before dark. It's called mahoitzi meliban shal tzedokim. We have this various times. We have this in Menachos, right? The tzedukam said that memachras haShabbos means always on Sunday, and therefore there were certain things that we did when it came to the Karban ha'omer was mahoitzi meliban shal tzedokim, etc. But listen, since this concept of doing something in a way to show that the tzedukam are wrong, but they made the kohen tamei. They took him to the mikvah. But someone who witnessed that, God forbid, would have felt erroneously that you can be a little bit lenient when it comes to the tumah, when it comes to the preparing of the paraduma. They make him tamei, they don't even have to wait until it's dark. So to compensate, to balance, to show that we have to be extremely precautious when it comes to tumah in the preparation of the paraduma, they took other steps that were extremely stringent. One of which we also learned in Shkalim, that they would prepare this ramp, right, to make sure that even the tumas hatahim is not matame, that you're not going to go over any tuma that might have been there in the past, and many other very unusual stringencies, like who got the water in which you put the ephra of the paraduma. So children, mothers who were pregnant went to locations that were built on platforms, also to make sure that there's no way that even if someone was buried underneath this area many years ago, the tumah won't go up because there was a peseach tefach. And these babies were born, and they waited until they were 8 or 9 years old in that area, not going in any other place. And they were the ones that got the waters, and many other unusual chumras to balance this leniency. So let's read it inside. They would dafka. They would purposefully render tamei, the kohen that's going to burn the para, and then they will matbil and oisai, and before dark this was the kohen that shechted and burnt the parah. Why is that? That they invented that only that you have to wait until dark. If not, the vestige of Tumah, which doesn't allow you to touch Truma, which doesn't allow you to touch Kachim, will not allow you to do the Avodah. However, as we mentioned, so now that they were lenient, in other words, they did something that was borderline. They wanted to balance it. For people to understand that you have to be very machmir also. That whatever God does not allow, you have to stay away from. So takinu l'Rabbanan, that this chamber should only have klei gelalim, klei avanim and klei adamam, in order to loy likablo tumam, kehecha deloy lizalzulu ba, for there not to be a zilzul because of the fact that they were metame the kohen. Now, why was the chamber in which the kohen preparing the paraduma was sequestered? Why was it in the Tzafayna Mizracha? Why was it in the northern eastern area of the Azara? Says the Gemara, even the Chatos. Since the Torah calls the Paraduma Chatos, and it's of course a very unusual Chatos. It was not a Chatos that was geschachten in the Beis Hamikdash. It was not coming for a specific sin. Yeah, we know in Parshas Chukas that it's a chayk, but one of the reasons behind the whole concept of the Paraduma is to be machaper al maisa of the egel, let the mother be machaper over her child, correct, but this para is not your normal chatos, but the Torah calls it a chatos. So since chatos, a normal chatos, has to be slaughtered dafka b'tzfeinam, as we have the three-way machloikas tanoim, exactly where's the tzfein hamizbeach, but it has to be in the northern part of the Azara. So therefore, to remember that this is also considered a chatos, the chamber was b'tzfeinam. What about the Mizracha? Because since it also says regarding the Paraduma, that when they shechted it in Harazesim, part of the Avodah was sprinkling the blood towards the Beis HaMikdash, and where was the Kohen standing and sprinkling the blood? He was facing the eastern opening of the Beis HaMikdash, as it says, El Noichach Pnei Oyel Moyed, towards the eastern part of the Oyel Moyed. So therefore, takinu l'Rabbanan, that this lishka should be where it's feina mizracha, ki heicha de lahevi lehekeda, for the kohen to have a heked. He should remember, he should have a reminder. Number one, tzfaina, chatos. Number two, to remember that the blood has to be sprinkled towards the eastern opening to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, the Gemara continues explaining this Mishnah in Para. Why is it called Bida? Opposite the Bida. Where exactly is the Bida? Now, Bida is a word for a palace. Says the Gemara, Amar Abba Bar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Makaim Hoya B'Harabayis. And Ubida Shemai, there was a specific place on Harabayis that was called Bida, and this chamber was opposite it. Reish Lakish says, no. Bida is the name of the Beis Hamikdash. Kol HaMikdash Kula Ikar Bida. Shenemer, as it says, on pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, words said by David HaMelech, Habira Asher Hachi Noisi, and that was David referring to the Beis Hamikdash. That even though Yedechem Damim Malu, which is why he personally was not allowed to build the first Beis Hamikdash, but he prepared everything for it, and he used the word Bira Nikuda. Okay, so now we have two areas. One, Shivas Yamim Koydem Yom Kippurim. Number two, Shivas Yamim Koydem Sreifas HaPara, that we are mafresh, in our case, the Kohen Gadol, in Paraduma, the Kohen that's going to be doing the Avodah, says the Gemara, Mino Hani Mili. Where do we get that from? On both the Kohen Gadol, Yom Kippurim, and the Para, and the Kohen Stam for the Paraduma. So Amarav Min Yumei Bar Chilkiya, Amarav Machasya Baridi, Amarav Yechanan. Now, Chavra, this is going to be as a hemshech of a few daf. So we're beginning now quoting Rav Min Yumei, quoting Rav Machasya, quoting Rabbi Yechanan. That will be answer number two. That Amar Kra. Now the full pasuk is a pasuk towards the end of Parshas Tzav, as we mentioned in the introduction. That we had Shivas Yimei Hamaluim. There were 7 days, you can call them days of inauguration. But these were days in which the Kohanim did not do the Avodah. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one that did the Avodah. And then, Vayihi B'Yom HaShmini, then at the beginning of Parsha, that's the day that the Kohanim began. What does it say regarding the Shivas Yimei Hamaluyim? So I'm going to read the entire pasuk. It says, Umi Pesach Oyel Moyed Loi Seitzu Shivas Yamim. that they were not allowed to leave the door of the oil moed. They were also sequestered in the oil moed. For how long? It says, Ad yoim milois yemei miloechem. Which means that they were, prior to the 8th day, all of the 7 days they were sequestered. And then the Pasuk writes at the end of Parshas Tzav that Kasher, now we're reading the Pasuk, Kasher asa b'yom hazeh, just like it happened during the Shivas Yemei HaMiluyim, that the Kohanim were sequestered, mafrishin, they were quarantined. So says the Pasuk, Siva Hashem, lasois lachaper aleichem, end of Pasuk. God commanded, lasois lachaper. Lasois lachaper are two different events. Taiches Rabbi Yechanan, lasois goes to doing the para. Same thing you have to do whenever you're lasois, paraduma. Lachaper goes on Maise Yoy Makipurim. That's the source. In both of these cases, in Yom Kippur, it's only the Kohen Gadol. By the paraduma, doesn't have to be the Kohen Gadol. It can be whichever Kohen is going to be the one doing the avodah of the paraduma. That they have to be sequestered for 7 days. Lasois lachaper. Gavaldik. Now, says the Gemara Bishleim Kra Bapara Kulei Kra Bapara Loy Mitoikam. I get it that this pasuk, you can't say that the pasuk is only hinting to para aduma, because since the pasuk uses the words lechaper and upara lav bas kapara, a very important line. Yeah, with all of the challenges, people ask again, the para aduma is lechaper al ma'aseh ha'egel? Yes and no. Yes and no. The avodah of the shechting and the burning of the para aduma is not called a kapara. That's what the Gemara says over here. Bringing a carbon chatas in the Beis HaMikdash is an avodah of kapara, and as is a carbon asham, but not the para aduma. The maisa of para aduma will say is coming letahir, not lechaper. So therefore, for sure, the pasuk in Sav is alluding to Yom Kippurim. However, asks the Gemara, how do you know that we are alluding to two different futuristic halachos, lasois, paraduma, lachaper Yom Kippurim? Maybe the pasuk in Sav is telling you, like we mentioned, that kasher asa b'yom hazeh, that is a fact, that they were sequestered for 7 days, and then they did the avodah v'hi b'yom hashmini. Tziva Hashem lasois lachaper. It goes to both Yom. Both words refer to Yom Kippurim. You have the Tosfos here at the end of the Amid. The first Tosfos in Amid Beit is going to have to work through the semantics, but isn't lasois lachaper extra? All of that is dealt in the Rishonim. Let's go weiter in the Gemara. Answers the Gemara. For that I have a Gzeira Shava. Amri, they answered like this: that the Aleph Tziva Gzeira Shava. Ksifach, it says over here, the pasuk in Sav. The pasuk of the Shivas Yemei HaMiluyim. It's that Siva Hashem Lasois. And it says, the third to last line in the Amid, and we're quoting a pasuk in Parshas Chukas, a pasuk of Paraduma, Zois, Chukas, HaToira, Asher, Tziva Hashem Leimoir, Tziva, Ma Lahalon, Param. Right, declared. That's the pasuk of the Paraduma. So the allusion to the Paraduma isn't Lasois per se, but it's the Tziva. Afkan, the pasuk in Sav, is also, not only, of course, Lachaper is Yom Kippurim, but the Tziva is Para. And what's the Gezeira Shava for? For this din. Ma kan Prisha. In Parshas Tzav, that's what the Torah says. When Pesach oil moed loy seitzu, they were sequestered, they were quarantined. So Ma'af Lahalon, when whoever does the Paraduma 7 days prior, and we'll learn more details about it. Maybe he became tummy through a mace and we don't know about it. So they would sprinkle waters of the old paraduma on him during those 7 days with many other pratim. No, these were mamish chumras just in case, to make sure that he's separated from tuma and he's going to become purified from a potential tuma. Aflahalon, it is also prisha, meaning prisha is required. Dav beis, amid beis. And as we will see, and this is going to go into Dav Gimel, that we're going to see, the question will be, how do you know first that it means 7 days for paraduma? We have a tziva. How do you know that it refers to Yom Kippurim? We're going to be challenging both of these halachas. Now, the ema, you have a Gezeira Shava, but still, maybe the tziva also only refers to Yom Kippurim. So the lasois lachaper is Yom Kippur, tziva is Yom Kippur. So this pasuk that Rabbi Yechanan brings should only be a source for Perisha 7 days before Yom Kippur. How do you know? What will be the source now from the Mishnah and Para? Where do you have the tziva? Because it says in Achrei Mois, which is the parsha of Yom Kippur, Vaya'as kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe. No, so again, maybe the whole pasuk in Tzav is only speaking about Yom Kippur, alluding to Yom Kippur. Says the Gemara, no, because Donin tziva de lifnei asiyam, in Parshas Tzav, there's two words, there's tziva and lasos. Which word comes before the other? In Parshas Tzav it says, by kasher tziva Hashem lasos, tziva and then asiyah. In Parshas Chukas, the word lasos is not written, but we're going to use the word lemor because God commanded to do. The word lemor is connected to the lasos. In Parshas Chukas it says asher tziva Hashem lemor. Also the tziva before the lasos. So it's more similar. So again, that we compare tziva the lifnei asiyam and tziva l'nei. So Chukas is taka similar. Not only in the word tziva, but in the placement of the word tziva. To Parshas Tzav, ve'ein donen tziva de la'achar asiyah. Tziva de lifnei asiyah. Oh. So when we're quoting Yom Kippur, what does it say in Yom Kippur? It says, Vayas kasher tziva. The word doing is before commanding. So it's less similar. So if you have a Gzeira Shava, and these are rules of Gzeira Shava. First of all, Ein Adam Don Gzeira Shava, only if his Rebbe taught him the Gzeira Shava. Which means they all come from Moshe. They all come from God. But God said tziva tziva. God did not say which tziva tziva. So now we have to use Seichel to see which tziva makes the most sense. Part of it is, it has to be the most similar. Oh, frag the Gemara, hold on. I get it that there's a tziva, and we're not going to use that. We're not going to use the tziva for Yom Kippur. We already know Yom Kippur from Lasis Lachaper. We're good. But why are we saying tziva is coming to include paraduma, ve'ema tziva de karbanos? That means that every time a kohen is going to do a karban tzibur, can you imagine? 7 days prior, he has to be sequestered from his house. And where do we have? Why? V'dechsiv b'yoyim tzavoisoi es b'nei Yisrael. Now, we're bringing a new source, right, to use another tziva. Answers the Gemara, no. That danin tziva mitziva, they are exactly the same. Ve'ein danin tzavoisoi, which is the pasuk of karbanos from tziva. Because it's not exactly the same word. Now, does Gzeira Shava need exactly the same word? And the Shas will always bring the following challenge. You can see this is brought in Eruvin Yavamas and Nazar Amakas and Horis Menachis Chulin B'Chayra Isnida, that if the content of the words are the same, they could be used as Gzeira Shava. And where do we find two words that are, the semantic is completely different, but the content is the same? That's by a Mitzvah. And Bekitzer, when we're speaking about Tzoras HaBayis, so the Torah goes into the various steps, that the first time that the kohen comes to inspect the house, the Torah goes through details that the kohen removes the stones that have the affliction. Then he has to scrape off the plaster. Remember that? Then he has to bring new stones. A whole procedure, Begashmi, is what the kohen does to the house. Then he comes back a week later. The first time the kohen comes, it's called Ubo HaKohen. He comes for the first time. Then the next time he comes, V'shov HaKohen, he returns. Now, what does he do when he returns? The Torah doesn't say that then again he has to remove the stones and scrape off the plaster and bring new, doesn't say any of that. But we learn from a Gzeira Shava, Ba, Shav, coming and returning, two different words. But it means he's coming to the house, that all of the details that are written by one goes to the other. That's the source that a Gzeira Shava need not share exactly the same external word. What we do need is for them to have the same content. So why are we excluding karbanos? Because by karbanos it says tzavoisoi, and by the source rule, which is by the Shiva Simei Amulim, it says tziva. So what? We learned in the Shiva of Rabbi Yishmael when it says v'shav HaKohen, and again the pratim are not written by the v'shav HaKohen. Most of the pratim are written by the first time of the kohen's coming to the house, Ubo HaKohen. And he says we learn one from the other because zuhi shiva, zuhi bia. So because the content is the same. It's the kohen coming to inspect the house. Answers the Gemara, you're right. If there is no other possibility how and where to apply the Gzeira Shava, it doesn't bother us if the words are different since the contents are the same. But when you have two options where to apply the tziva tziva, tziva tziva or tziva tzavoisai, then yes, we'll say that tziva tziva is more similar. Tziva tzavoisai is less similar. That's the klal. So therefore we exclude tzavoisai of karbanos, that a kohen who's doing the avodah, any avodah of communal karbanos, doesn't have to be sequestered and quarantined for the 7 days. Nekuda. So now at least we got the source for para adumas from tziva tziva. Now what's the source for Yom Kippurim? The beginning of Rabbi Yechanan, lachaper. Lachaper goes on Yom Kippur. Hold on, my friends. I know that Yom Kippur is called Yom HaKippurim, the day of kapara, but don't other karbanos bring about kapara? Maybe the lachaper in Parshas Tzav, fragt die Gemara, lachaper, Rabbi Yechanan says, Elo Maisa Yom HaKippurim, right? Rav Manyume, Omar Rav Machaske, Rabbi Yechanan. Why ve'ema? Now we're moving on. Maybe the last is lachaper. Maybe lachaper goes to kapara de karbanos. You know what that could mean to the extreme? It can even mean by a karban yachad, Rashi says. Maybe every time a kohen brings a karban from anyone, that kohen, maybe he became tamei. Maybe as a precaution, he should be sequestered 7 days before, with all of the details. So the Gemara says, what, a kohen who's going to do the avodah has to be sequestered? We won't know which kohen to sequester. We don't even know before which kohen is going to be doing the avodah. They made lotteries. So counters the Gemara, Miya the Inan, do we know Hai kohen misrami, which kohen will happen to be the one winning the lottery? The boyale perisha. So therefore, you can't sequester the kohen. And the Gemara right away counters, that's not a logic. Oh yes, we could. Because Amru, they challenged, they re-asked, Alam aloi, why not? The entire Beis Av of this Mishmar, now what's the whole point of a Beis Av? That we had ultimately 24 Mishmaris, but there were so many Kohanim and all of them want to do the Avodah, and there was a system of lotteries that we'll speak even a little about today. But still, we wanted, people should not be frustrated. You know, you go into a lottery and you lose and you lose and you lose your enthusiasm. Or you get disappointed too many times. So they divided every Mishpah into 6 Batei Av. And every Beis Av was designated for 1 day's Avodah. So at least you are beginning with a pool of lesser number of Kohanim, which ups the chance for every individual Kohen to win the lottery to do some of the Avodah of that day. So the Beis Av knows we work on Sunday, so maybe the entire Beis Av, Shivas Yomim, before that Sunday, has to be the steps, they have to be sequestered from their house and quarantined in a certain location to prevent them of becoming tamei. Why don't we say that? Answers the Gemara that done in davar shekavoy lo izman is Yom Kippur. That is going to be learned. What's the mother law? What's the source law? The Shiva Simei Hamaluyim. We knew when that was. Midavar shekavoy lo izman. It was 7 days. The 7 days prior to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So they're very similar. So the lachaper is going to Yom Kippur. La'afuke karbanis the chol Yoma isnu. It's not something that's kavoy lo izman. It's less similar. So that's why we use the lachaper to Yom Kippur. We're not done yet. Fine. I get it. Every karban yachid doesn't have a kavul kaviyos zman. It's done every single day. But what about the karbanos that are brought on Yomim Tovim? And by the way, some of them are lachaper, soir lachaper. That's also kavua zman. So before every Yom Tiv, why don't we say there has to be a 7-day sequestration and quarantining? Answers the Gemara, done in davar shenoik pamachas bashana, which is Yom Kippur. Midavar hanoik pamachas bashana. What's davar hanoik pamachas bashana? The inauguration of the Beis Hamikdash. Now the day of the Mishkan, the inauguration of the Mishkan was not only noig pamachas bashana, it was noig pamachas nekuda. Doesn't matter. But on that year, it was the one time in the year. On that year, it was one time. So again, it's Yom Kippur is more similar. So the teacher will teach a student that's more similar. And la'afuke the golem the lav pamachas bashana ninu. Frek the Gemara, we're not done yet. That's not a good answer. I get it. You can't learn that all of the regalim have to have the Shivas Yomim, but why don't we learn lechaper for one regel? Like, why are you picking Yom Kippur? One of the Yomim Tovim, we're speaking about the three Yomim Tovim, the three regalim, one of the three. And if you're going to tell me the chitemet that lo yadi'in haiminai, we're not going to know which one. And the two options we have over here is Chag HaMatzos, right? And why would we say Chag HaMatzos? Because Chag HaMatzos has something over the other two. Because Hoyel Pasach Bayakos of Tefilla, that means the Pasach and Pashas Pinchas that goes through the Musafim and all of the Yomim Tovim begins with the B'Chodesh Rishon, B'Chamisha Asa. Or it might go to Sukkos. Why would we pick Sukkos over the other two? Because Hoyel Umeruba Mitzvasai. Interesting logic. And as Rashi writes here, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid, that Chag HaSukkos, you have Sukkah, and you have Lulav, and you have Arava, and you have Nisuch HaMayim. So not Shavuos, but maybe one or the other. And I'll tell you more. And since you don't know which one, for both, L'chaper is maybe going to teach you Shivas Yomim before Pesach or Sukkos, and to be machmer both, there has to be this Hafrasha Shivas Yomim. So answers the Gemara, the first white line, no. Elodanon, Pirishas, Shiva, Liyoim Echad. What happened in the source law? The day that the Kohanim did the Avodah was one day on the 8th day, Vayihi Bayoim Hashmini. And they would sequester 7 days before, during the entirety of the Shivas Yimei HaMeloim. So it was 7 days of Perisha for them to do the Avodah on one day. Now, what are we comparing? Now, what's on Yom Kippur? Exactly the same thing. That 7 days before Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol mafrishin mi beisoi for 1 day of Avodah. So done in Perisha Shivil Yom Echad, we learn Yom Kippur. That's the right student because it's the most similar to the teacher. Mi Perisha Shivil Yom Echad, which is the Shivas Yimei HaMeloim. What are you suggesting? Why don't we use the Shivas Yimei HaMeloim as a teacher to before Pesach, 7 days before Pesach? No, because Pesach in itself is not a 1 day Yom Tov. Pesach is a 7 day Yom Tov. So then it's going to be a Perisha of 7 days for Yom Tov of 7 days, 7-7. No, we're looking for 7-1. Ain't done in Perisha Shivas Shiva Lishiva. Perisha Shivas Lishiva. Okay, mi Perisha Shivas Lishiva. We can't learn Shiva Lishiva, which is Pesach or Sukkos, from the Vayiba Yom Hashmini. Yeah, we're only gonna teach one student. We're gonna learn one din. The most similar is Yom Kippur. End of the second line. Hold on, we're not done yet. I get it. That's Pesach is 7 days in Eretz Yisrael. Sukkos is 7 days in Eretz Yisrael. What about Shmini Atzeres? Shmini Atzeres is 1 day. Ve'ema Atzeres. Now, guys, this will continue because you can ask, what about Rosh Hashanah? What about Shavuos? We'll have that on Daf Gimel. But let's begin now with Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is a 1 day. Why don't we say that maybe the Lechaper is telling you that 7 days before Shmini Atzeres, all of the Kohanim, because there all of the Kohanim get to do the Avodah of Shmini Atzeres, should have to do a Perisha. The Perishas Shivas Yomim to a Yom Tov that's only 1 day. Answers the Gemara. I know that Shmini Atzeres is only 1 day, but prior to Shmini Atzeres are days of Kedusha. It's back to back with Sukkos. So it's not similar. What's more similar? The mother-in-law, the teacher, right? Vayihi Bayom Hashmini is preceded by 7 days that are not Yom Tov days. Shivas Yimei HaMeloim, the last 7 days of Adar. What is the most compatible student? Yom Kippur. 7 days prior to Yom Kippur is not Yom Tov. Let's read it inside. Done in Davar She'ei is not Yomim of Kedusha. It's not Yomim of Kedusha. It's Mutar B'Siyas Malach. Done in Davar She'ein Kedusha Lefanav, Mi Davar She'ein Kedusha Lefanav. That makes them the most similar. Ve'ein done in Davar She'esh Kedusha Lefanav, which will be Shmini Atzeres, that has 7 days of Sukkos before it, Mi Davar She'ein Kedusha Lefanav. Says the Gemara, whoa, that should be the opposite. No. Hashta davar she'en kedusha lefanav. Which is what? Which was the Vayihi Bayom Hashmini, yet Boye Perisha. So davar she'esh kedusha lefanav, Shmini Atzeres has 7 days of Sukkos before it. Then like Kolchchen. Answers the Gemara, two answers. Answer number one, that in the pasuk that we're quoting, the source law, the pasuk in Parshas Tzav, the pasuk about the Shivas Yemei HaMeluim, it says, Kasher Asa Bayoim Hazeh. Like this day, Tziva Hashem Lasois Lechaper. Hazeh. Loi hazeh ksiv, so then steht nicht the word hazeh, which means, no, don't give me kal v'choimers. It must be kozeh. And Shmini Atzeres is not kozeh, because it has 7 days of Kedusha prior. Answer number two, Rav Ashi Amar, mi ikemide. Won't make sense, because if we will apply to Shmini Atzeres, what will come out? Sukkos, which is the main Yom Tiv, doesn't have Perisha. We're only applying it to one. Yeah, it's Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, that's considered a tafel. Can you imagine? It's considered a subsidiary of Sukkos. What, that will need Perisha? Mi kamida the ikaregel hoy be a Perisha. But tafel didei by a Perisha makes absolutely no sense, and therefore don't apply it for Shmini Atzeres. Now says the Gemara, why are we calling Shmini Atzeres a tafel? Is Shmini Atzeres a tafel? Well, we'll see. Not exactly. Shvi Shel Pesach prior to Mashiach is a tafel. We don't make a shechayanu prior to Mashiach. We have a tradition that since the resurrection is going to, Tchias HaMesim is going to happen on Pesach, there's going to be new futuristic events that happens over Pesach, so we might make a shechayanu later. But now it's mamash a tafel. Shmini Atzeres is not a tafel. It says the Gemara, and even according to those who hold that Shmini, meaning Shmini Atzeres, is considered regel bifnei atzmai, who is considered a independent Yom Tiv. Nevertheless, the answer of Rav Ashi still stands strongly. Because even that opinion, Hanamili, that regel bifnei atzmai is only le'inyan pizar keshav. We'll explain that in a moment. At least to a certain limited amount. There's a big machlekes rishonim what these pizar keshav refer to. But let's hold on. Everyone is moedim regarding the law of compensation, meaning that we are obligated to bring on the first day of Yom Tov, the first day of Sukkot, is a korban chagiga. If the person did not bring the korban chagiga on the first day of Pesach, then they can compensate for it. How long can you compensate for it? So the din is that Shmini Atzeres, which is already the 8th day, is still valid, that a person who is mechuyev can compensate it on Shmini Atzeres. You can do the tashlumen of the first day of Sukkot on Shmini Atzeres. Tashlumen derishonu, as it says, and we're going to have this in Chagiga, that mi shaloi chag b'yoyim treiv rishon shal chag, on the first day of Sukkot, on the 15th of Tishrei, choygig v'hoylach kol haregel kuloi, and here's the chiddush, v'yoyim treiv v'achrin shal chag is included. So since everyone holds that Shmini Atzeres, at least for the din of Tashlumen, is considered a subsidiary, it's a hemshech, so the logic of Rav Ashi stands. Now let's go through the Pizar Keshav, and we're going to learn Rashi. I want you to know that there's a big machloikas regarding many of these abbreviations, what they refer to. Even Beshitas Rashi itself, what Rashi means, there are certain stitas that we have between here and between a Rashi that we're going to have in Rosh Hashanah. Let's try to wrap this up in 2 minutes to give people time to run here to the minyan. So let's read inside the top Rashi. Pei. Pei stands for payos. Payos means a lottery. Payos la'atzmai, which means she'ein payos b'pari achag eitz la'mishmaris. As we will learn Chevre in Sukkah, that there was a unique rotation system that was done due to the fact that on Chag we brought so many parim. Remember, on the first day, 13 parim. That was the we go down. That was the Bishamay and Chanukah. 13, 12, 11, and there was a whole rotation system where everyone had their turn of bringing a certain amount of karbanos, but the karbanos that were brought on Shmini Atzeres did not follow that rotation. For that they made a separate lottery. Is the charaya that it's separated. It's not a hemshech. That's number one. Number two, I'm skipping a little bit just to go quicker. Zman, the Zayin means levarech shechiyanu. Like we mentioned, that we make a shechiyanu, but when we light the candles, we make a shechiyanu when we make kiddush. On Shmini Atzeres, it's separated. It's a new Yom Tov for that. Number 3, regel la'atzmai. That's the huge one. The guys, there are 6 shitas in the Rishonim. Rashi says the words, she'ein shem chag sukkos olav. Now, what does that mean, she'ein shem chag sukkos olav? Well, by Pashtus, it means that in the Shemona Esrei, in the Kiddush, we don't say, b'yoyim chag sukkos, we say b'yoyim. There's different nuschos. B'yoyim shmini atzeres has a different name. Heard a good word that the Kloisenberger Rebbe said, that there's a mitzvah for every chassid to see his Rebbe on Yom Tiv. So he teaches regel la'atzmai she'ein shem chag sukkos olav, that if a chassid went to the Rebbe for the first days of Sukkos, nish genuk, you have to go back to your Rebbe for Shmini Atzeres. And who doesn't want to be with the Rebbe on Simchas Torah? But anyway, and many other, there's a Rabbeinu Tam over here, but I'm just going to run through at least one of the opinions. Kuf, so that's the 3. So payas man and regel. Now the next word is kishav. Karban la'atzmai. What do I mean karban la'atzmai? So he says that the flow of karbanos, like we just pointed out, the fact that there was a system, 13, 12, 11, there was a whole seder which you saw a system of the 7 days of Sukkot. The number of karbanos that are brought on Shmini Atzeres don't follow that seder at all, like Rashi points out. It's a different set of karbanos. The shin l'Rashi stands for its own shiur. Now this is challenging because every day of Sukkot the Levium sang a different shiur. So Rashi explains that during the 7 days of Sukkot, even though every day there was another kapitel of Tehillim that the Levium would sing, but they all share a common theme. And the theme of Sukkot was all about the negative prohibition of withholding the entitlements of the poor, of not to hold back matnas aniyim. They all shared that single theme. The theme of the shiur of Shmini Atzeres was different. And the Beis says Rashi bracha la'atzmai. What's the bracha la'atzmai? That there was a special bracha that was made only on Shmini Atzeres, benching the king, as Rashi says, because since this happened bisman bayis rishon, not on Shmini Atzeres we bench shloima, so every Shmini, and that was a bracha that was made only on Shmini Atzeres. That's the Rashi's psak keshav. Now l'chayra, when you go into the deeper parts of the Torah, I'm saying this. If there's no source for this, then what I'm saying is not correct. But I always, when I remember that Pizar Kishav to me are very similar to the Shemus HaKadoshim that we have in the Ona B'Koyach. It's not the same, it's similar. Right, the Shem Mab, that we're not even allowed to pronounce. But you have the Pei Zayin Kuf. Right, Penei Zoichrei Kedushasecha. And we know, right, from the Maimarim of Basalagani, that the Kuf and the Reish, they're very similar. Right, and there is Rebbe Sich of Koirach. It says Hashem Kodesh, Pizar. And Kishav, they're also Shavasenu, Kabel, Ushma. I know it's not the same. Everyone has a different ois. There was something also mystical about this Shem, Pizar, Kishav. But anyways, the point of the Gemara is that even according to those who consider Shmini Atzeres a Yom Tov Bifnei Atzmai, it's not that it's a pure Yom Tov Bifnei Atzmai, and therefore Rav Ashi's answer stands, and we are up to the Hemshech Hadvarim, just to pick up, God willing, Sunday morning, that again, the Lechaper and Parshas Tzav is teaching us that there is another moment in the future where there has to be the 7th day of sequestering the Kohen. Why are we applying it Lechaper on Yom Kippur when there are other dates where Korbanis are brought Lechaper? God willing, to be continued.